Arts, just say a few words for us.
So all I really want to do is I want to thank you for coming out to this particular presentation of the Visiting Writers Series. Professor Laughlin puts on an amazing program every year, and we bring really high-end writers and poets to speak with you. And so my name is Matthew Olson. I'm the Dean of the Liberal Arts Division here at Middlesex. And on behalf of the President, who wasn't able to be here today, and the rest of the administration, I want to welcome you. And for those of you who are students, which I think is the majority of you, I want you to, no matter what your major is, to consider continuing to enroll in those courses that develop your creativity and your creative sides. No matter what your major is, creative writing or some of the other classes that we have that help you develop your creative thinking will help in any career that you are thinking about. And if you're interested in majoring in creative writing, we have an outstanding program with many opportunities. So whether you're an engineering major or interested in nursing, these are still great opportunities. And I want to thank John Fulton for coming out here too and sharing his expertise, not just with you today in the reading, but with also Jonathan's class. So anyway, thank you for coming, and that's all I got. So you can applaud me again.
Thanks so much, Matthew. I'm Tom Laughlin of the Creative Writing Program, and welcome to this Visiting Writers Series, our first of the 23-24 year. This is a series that is sponsored by the Creative Writing Program and the Office of Student Engagement, and just want to thank the Office of Student Engagement, Dean Olson, and Chair of English Department Jill Keller for their support, Francois de Coster, Jeff Kaplan and his staff who are recording this event, Beth Noel of Marketing, who helps us to get word out. Today you'll hear John Fulton read from his fiction. He has a new book out, and he will talk about his work. We'll have a question and answer period. There will be a raffle. 3 of his books are being raffled off to students, and opportunities to talk with him afterwards. John Fulton has published 4 books of fiction, including this newly released Flounder and Other Stories, published by Blackwater Press earlier this year in June, which is a Poets and Writers Page 1 New and Noteworthy book selection. His previous books are The Animal Girl, LSU Press in 2007, which was a Story Prize notable. Retribution, published by Picador in 2001, which won the Southern Review Short Fiction Prize, and the novel More Than Enough, published by Picador in 2002, which was a Barnes & Noble's Discover Great New Writers selection. His short fiction has been published in many literary magazines and journals, including the Missouri Review, The Sun, and Plowshares. His short story, Hunters, won a 2006 Pushcart Prize, and his work has been cited for distinction in the Best American Short Stories and shortlisted for the O. Henry Award. He's received grants and fellowships from the New York Writers Institute, Swanee Writers Conference, the Vermont Studio Center, and the Michigan Council for the Arts and Cultural Affairs. He grew up in Utah and Montana, attended Whitman College in Washington State, and lived in Europe for 5 years, during which time he worked as a chauffeur and a translator. He earned his MFA, or Master's in Fine Arts in Fiction, from the University of Michigan, where he taught creative writing and literature for many years. He is now a professor and director of the Masters of Fine Arts and Creative Writing program at UMass Boston. His website is johnfulton.net. Nina McLaughlin, the writer and Boston Globe books columnist, highlighted John Fulton's new book in her column this past June, writing, I quote, "John Fulton's new collection of short stories, The Flounder, explores the tug between who we are and who we tell ourselves we are. Fulton excels at capturing the big wounds and the minor gripes, the intimacies, the betrayals, the grave dissatisfactions, and the rare, quiet moments of solace, connection, and grace. There are ghosts in these stories, not footless haunters, but of memory, forces that hover in the off stages of our minds that we can't see or name, but live in us, rattling the unanswerable questions that wake us in the night." Please welcome John Fulton.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you, Tom, for the invitation, and to Middlesex Community College, amazing facility here, and to Jonathan Bennett. I really enjoyed that class, and the students too. So I thought, we're going to try to keep this to around 1:30, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So we'll go for, I guess I'll read for about 20 minutes or so, and then we'll talk. But I wanted to say a few things about the collection rather than just read to you. But I am going to read from a story called What Kent Boyd Had, which is, as the students I was working with earlier today will know, a list story, or what I would call a list story. It's a story that tells itself in the form of a list. And I'll talk about that story a little bit more in a minute, and the challenges of that. But first, I wanted to say a few things about the collection. The collection, many of the stories I've been trying to write for decades. And I've been they've finally started to happen around the lockdown. I'll say more about that in a minute, but I've been getting to know the book in the way a reader gets to know the book during the last few months of talking about it and reading from it. And as a writer, you're kind of more close to the material, and you can't necessarily see it in that way. But one of the things we do when we publish a book, we work with our editors and we write the blurbs on the back. And as I've talked about the book and been interviewed and written interviews, I realized that one of the things we said in the back cover blurb was accurate, which is that the book is about, in part, the riddle of desire, what we want, why we want it, and even the problem of desire, what it means to want something. When I was in my early and mid-20s, I grew up in the Intermountain West, the Rocky Mountain region, in a pretty conservative community, and I sort of came to writing and reading a little bit late, and many of my favorite writers at that time, the American modernists like Ernest Hemingway and Gertrude Stein and T.S. Eliot and someone like James Joyce, they all left home to write about home. And I felt like, I got to get out of here. The West is a big place. I've been here a long time. And so I went to Europe, and I lived in Switzerland and Berlin, Germany for 4 years. And it was a really challenging and interesting time. It was the early 90s, so the Cold War had just kind of come to an end. Half of Europe was stepping out and into a kind of freedom. And I was in a first serious relationship I'd really been in. I was learning German, studying that, and it was really the first time I'd ever been seen as an American before, and the first time I really had a sense of how Americans were seen abroad, and that was all shocking and interesting. And I left about 4 years later. I came back to do grad school, came back to the States, and I tried for decades to write about this stuff. And it didn't really happen until I came back to Europe in 2019, 2020. In France, I did a year sabbatical with my family. And we got through about 7 months of that, and then lockdown happened. And I was locked into a room with 2 kids and my partner. And I think being locked down and surrounded by history really allowed that material that for whatever reason couldn't get into story form, material that I told you about, to start to come out onto the page. And I'll say this about the title. The title, The Flounder, comes from a Brothers Grimm's fairy tale. And when I was living in Germany and Switzerland in my early 20s, one of the ways I learned German was to read a lot, and I decided to read all of the Brothers Grimm's fairy tales in German. And what I discovered is, I think we Americans think we know these, right? But the versions we know are not the original. They are the Disneyfied versions. So I read these and I couldn't believe, first of all, how beautiful they are, but also how dark and brutal and violent and full of blood and torture. It's amazing that they're children's stories. I was just blown away. And how complex they are, too, in some ways. So they stuck with me, and when I started to write these stories, something of those fairy tales seeped into them. The title story, which is called The Flounder, comes from a Brothers Grimm's fairy tale called The Fisherman and His Wife. It's also been called The Flounder. Anybody who's read Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse will recognize this story because Mrs. Ramsay reads it to her young child, James. And it comes up in this story. It's a story about a young couple, American expatriates, who are living in Switzerland. They're about to go on their first vacation since they've moved to Switzerland. They're going to go over into France. And the night before they go, the wife reveals that she's just had an affair. So it's a tough way to go on your first vacation. They've got a big problem. There's anger and emotion in the air. They go into France, and they enter into this kind of strange hotel, and things become somewhat gothic and magical. And one of the issues they're having, this young couple, is they don't really quite know what they want from each other or what they want themselves. And the wife tells this story. It's been on her mind. And the story, obviously I've been obsessed with it too, is very simple. This fisherman, he goes out, he catches a fish, it's a magic fish, and it says, if you let me back, I will give you 3 wishes, right? Very dangerous, the 3 wishes. Well, he throws it back, goes back to his wife and says, well, caught this fish, we can have anything we want, 3 wishes. She says, okay, go back and ask for all the gold in the world. So she does, no, the first thing is a palace. He asks for a palace. He comes back, their little hovel has been turned into a palace. She says, now ask for all the gold. He goes back, fish says, sure, you've got all the gold. He goes back, nothing but gold. Oh, and the power of the king. So he's got soldiers and all of that. So the wife says, ask to be God. So he goes back. The fish says, okay, you're God. He goes back, the palace is gone, the hovel is there, and they sit down and they eat something like a bowl of stone soup. But they're happy. They've got smiles on their faces. And that really stuck with me. Why? Because they're happy, but for the reader, there's cognitive dissonance. We're not happy with that. Why should they be happy with their hovel and their stone soup, right? And that stuck with me, and I thought, well, the problem, of course, with desire is that as soon as you have something, you want something else. There is no satisfaction to it. And the problem, of course, in that story is to get rid of desire. But that doesn't make us happy either, right? So this is one of those large questions. And when I was writing this story, to come back to that, it's about a guy who's kind of a self-made guy. He comes from nothing and he makes it big and relatively big. And you'll see how. But for him, having come from nothing, it made sense that the list would be kind of all the things he's managed to acquire and how they become important to him and define who he is. But when I was writing the story, and I give my students, as I gave the students today, an exercise to write a list story. I had taken on the exercise thinking, usually I don't do that, right? I'm the teacher, I don't have to do the exercises that I assign. But I didn't really have anything else going on at my writing desk, and I just assigned it to my students. So I started it and thought, maybe it's not that interesting, I won't finish it. But I kept digging it out, kept working on it, and I started to notice that the list wasn't all working in Kent Boyd's favor, that there were some things here that he actually didn't really want to have. And that started to make the list interesting, started to be expressive of who he was and his life situation and the tensions in his life. And the overall question, right, that I think we all ask, and certainly this guy Kent Boyd was starting to ask, is what does make a life valuable? What does make it mean something at the end of the day? So that's it. I'll start. I'll read about half of this. I think it'll be about 20 minutes or so, and then we'll talk. So again, this is what Kent Boyd had, and it's the challenge I gave Jonathan's students today to write a story in the form of a list. And then, in his mid-40s, just as he started to feel slower in his limbs, the mornings seeming to drag, the darkness seeming to fall sooner each day, even in the spring and summer months, Kent Boyd nonetheless convinced himself that he still had, among other things, his youth. He had countless sunrises before him. He had a great deal more to expect and hope for, especially if his past was a predictor of his future. And since he was an optimist, he chose to believe it would be. He had 2 kids, Alice, 13, who'd inherited her mother's fair complexion and curly red hair, a conflagration that blazed down half her back, and Ethan, 11, who'd gotten Kent's oddly handsome bulldog face and his lumpy nose, a feature Kent had always regretted and often lied about, claiming he'd broken it, which was no longer an option now that his son carried around a small replica of it. He had a $2 million house in a nice neighborhood of Boston, a partnership in a small corporate law firm that he'd helped to found and that specialized in copyright and patent law. He had a decent, if weathered, Subaru, a car he chose to drive, even though he could afford much better, because he wanted to set an example for his kids. He'd met enough class-conscious rich brats and didn't want to father 2 more. He had several summers and long vacations behind him dedicated to his obsession with golf. Rising at 5 every morning, heaving his clubs into the old Subaru, meeting friends to tee off at sunrise, slashing away at the bright little ball, its dot of light soaring above the vast green dunes until late in the afternoon. In the game, he had 2 spectacular achievements, a 34-foot putt on the most difficult green with a severe back-to-front slope at St. Andrews in Scotland, birthplace of the sport, and a birdie at Augusta. He had Bernard, his partner and closest friend, who never let him forget his talent, celebrating it in the bar afterwards by lifting a glass and shouting, "You've got balls, Boyd. You've got one hell of a stroke." And it was true. He had one hell of a stroke until he gave up the game like that, never called Kent Boyd predictable, and started running 4 mornings a week until he had 2 marathons, the Boston and the New York to his name, until the belly he'd had, and that his golf buddies still had, was gone. He had a new lease on life, a refinanced mortgage on the house at just under 4%, though he could easily have paid the rest off in cash. A significant patent infringement victory, Gillette versus Bic, in which he'd shown the court to the tune of $700 million that Bic's revolutionary glide system was a thinly veiled ripoff of his client's 6-glide pivot head. Is that plain fair? He'd asked the court, flashing a fistful of disposable razors in the air. I don't think so. Nor, it turned out, the jury. And he had, didn't everybody, some things he'd just as soon not have. Childhood memories, for instance, of growing up in Pueblo, Colorado, where his father worked at the Colorado Fuel and Iron Mill, as long as he could stand to, which turned out to be about 4 years into Kent's life, just in time for him to remember this man, a strange, sepia-toned giant, arms akimbo, a large smile on his face that seemed remote from the cold, vacant eyes, an oversized laugh that could turn to a shout and a fist on the table in an instant. He left one morning for the mill and never came back. Working as a nurse's aide at the state hospital for the chronically and mentally ill, his mother had lived so much in fear of financial ruin, fear of homelessness, fear of murderers breaking into their little home at night, fear of loneliness, that she joined a small church in a Quonset hut on the south side of town where Kent helped helped set up metal folding chairs before each service and learned of the rapture, the beast, the horseman of the apocalypse. He grew up expecting the end of the world, a yoke of sun falling into a sea of blood, Christ returning as the lion, not the lamb, to slaughter sinners and raise the righteous from the dead, divide the sheep from the goats, and perhaps bring back his father too. For years he had faith as palpable, as present as any other object he might have had, as a new car, perhaps, in which he could sit, sink into the seat, pull the belt tightly around him, and take the fresh smells of felt, of carpet and vinyl, the wind beating against the high-tempered glass and blasting in through open windows as he and his mother fled from the tumbleweeds and dusty back lots of that town forever. But they never took this final drive, not having a new car, or even an old one, for that matter, having only faith in which they could not drive away from anything, though it did help them stay in their place. He talked to God. In Jesus, he had a friend. He said every night, and sometimes during the day, "Hi, Jesus, it's Kent." He said, "Jesus, I'm a sinner. I'm far away from you, Lord, and I want to come home. Please forgive me." But the world never ended, and his father never returned. And soon after he graduated from Pueblo High, after he drank some beer, smoked some pot, after he committed these simple sins and nothing befell him, no great punishment, he lost his faith too. More than anything, more than his mother's fear, his father's absence, his lost faith, his car, his house, his 34-foot putt, his 2 marathons, more even than his son and daughter, more than all these things, he had the love of his life, Kate, or Catherine Elliott, who became, to his great surprise, Catherine Boyd. They'd met in the early 60s in Berkeley, he a scholarship student and she an East Coaster who possessed that look, a composure, a confidence of someone who'd always been coddled, who lived among the rich in a clean village with a green at its center and a white steepled church in which the word apocalypse was never mentioned. Ken talked too much, especially when he wanted to impress, and she let him talk and talk one afternoon, even seemed to listen on the day they walked through Golden Gate Park and out onto the bridge, still girders rising cathedral-like above them, gulls bobbing in the eddies of wind, giant tankers mere darts on the endless blue-black sheet of the Pacific below. He didn't need to be a goddamn radical or hippie like every other student in 1968. He wasn't interested in the age of Aquarius, dropping acid, changing the world. He wanted to be influential. He knew that much, but was under no illusions that he could alter the course of history or stop wars or usher in an era of peace and love, a bliss without end. He didn't even want to. What was wrong, after all, with a struggle in which you could, at least in America, rise to the top with some luck and a great deal of will and determination? Maybe he'd clerk at the Supreme Court. Maybe he'd dismantle large corporations and rebuild them again. He wanted a woman to love who would love him back, and a family that he'd make damn sure always had enough. More, much more than enough, and that he'd never leave. On the bridge that day, his hat, a black fedora, blew off, disappearing in the air above the bay, while Kate, her red hair lifting in the breeze, laughed at him and said, "My goodness, you talk, don't you? And then, I like you, but you need to listen too. Could I talk now, please?" She'd spoken quietly, but with force, and he'd liked her so much then that he was frightened. Her neck was long, streaked with delicate muscle, a dust of freckles just above her clavicles, her eyes pellucid blue, her breasts small. She'd laugh as if so surprised by liking him that she couldn't keep a straight face, which had hurt him just a little. And how hard he'd had to work for those few words. Was that all his half hour of nonstop boasting could elicit? "I like you," followed by incredulous laughter and a nice way of telling him to shut up. She wasn't effusive. She didn't cheapen sentiment by giving it away, and he listened then, kept his mouth shut, and heard her talk about her overbearing father, a banker in Boston, who'd come home and shut himself away from her mother, from her and her sister. And one day, during summer vacation, while the kids were down the street playing at a neighbor's just close enough to hear the report, shot himself through the head in his small office off the living room. About her love of sunshine, of California, about her depression from which she suffered at least a month, if not two, every winter. You'll have to know that about me, she said. And he did know, or come to know, the way she closed down, became remote at times, and he loved her even then too, and worried that what happened to her father might happen to her. A year later, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where Kate would earn her PhD in clinical psychology, and Kent would get his law degree, he asked her to marry him in the dimly lit restaurant of the Charles Hotel, on his knee with a diamond in hand. He'd practiced his speech, imagined it 20 times, and even then could barely get the words out, so that before she said yes, before she shook her head, her eyes moist, almost teary, though not quite, he only saw her cry twice, first when her mother died, and later when they checked their adult son into a rehab facility in Portland, Maine. She said with amazement, "You're afraid." And he said, "Damn right I am." And she whispered across the table for only the third time since they'd met, "I love you, Kent boy." And so he had his wife, and she meant more to him than everything else combined. Yet, and he would be the first to admit this, he took her for granted, just as he did all the other smaller things he had and rarely thought about. His beard, for instance, which he'd grown out in his 30s and kept for decades, his hazel eyes, his thinning hair, his general girth. He'd never been fat, but had never been thin either, which expanded all at once in his late 40s when he gave up running. His 6 feet 2 inches of height, his overloud voice, his teenage daughter was always telling him in public, restaurants and shopping malls, that he spoke too loudly. "Daddy, quieter, please," she whispered. And though he had, or wanted to have, easy, friendly relationships with his kids, he wondered too if they hadn't become like his beard, something there but forgotten. If his daughter was politely telling him to shut up, his son had retreated to his room where he blocked the world off with headphones and indulged his odd musical tastes. And this worried Kent. His kid, friendless, quiet, and remote. Just 1 second. Like his mother, and probably depressed too. "Hey, buddy," Kent said from out in the hall, only to receive in return a hard-edged "yeah," hurtled like a rock in his direction that meant clearly enough, "Go away." And so Kent did again and again, until he felt he never knew his son, until one day he gave up knowing him. And then, just as his life seemed to have taken like a bear in winter to its cave, Kent Boyd had something he'd never expected, though he probably should have, predictable as it was. And that made everything else come alive. An affair with his law partner and his best friend's wife, Jennifer Savage. Her surname was no less funny for the fact that it came from Bernard, who was anything but, who was, in a word, tame. For 21 years and counting, Bernard had worshipped Kent Boyd, lifted drink after drink to praise this or that about him, his golf game, his courtroom prowess, the birth of his children. "You still have it, my friend," he'd say. What was it about a man who showed excessive and undeserved respect that made it impossible for Kent to respect him back? Bernard worked twice as hard as Kent in the law firm, yet gave him most of the credit. He was almost handsome, bearish in stature and balding, all of which made him seem a slightly less impressive reflection of Kent. He covered his otherwise bad breath with Tic Tacs and certs. He fought for years to kick an addiction to cigarettes, trying patches, gum, pills, hypnosis, and acupuncture. And when he finally succeeded, he humiliated and half-beaten by the struggle. He had followed Kent to Boston after law school and moved in down the street from him in a slightly smaller house with a wife who, as often as not in the summer months, wore short shorts and low-cut tops. It seemed to Kent that he had seen her once in the early morning while walking his dog. She was standing in the open doorway of her house and wearing a nightie that came to mid-thigh and that was held to her waist by a man's leather belt. Or had that been a dream that had weaved its way into lived experience? Why did a man who wanted nothing more than a family to take care of, a wife to love, kids never to turn his back on, have an affair with Jenny Savage? Perhaps because Kate and he only had sex after scheduling it. They were busy people. Perhaps because Kate only went down on him, though he never blamed her for this, never felt anything other than sympathy and appreciation if he'd showered and soaped himself beforehand. Kate had never much liked crowds or a good party or all those fancy shindigs with clients that the firm threw and from which Kent Boyd was nearly always the last to leave. She'd rather read than laugh at some egomaniac's supposedly funny jokes. And then there were her depressions that came over her like a dark question that he couldn't answer, nor had she ever asked him to, ever said, "Help me, I'm in pain, I'm lonely, I need you, Kent." Perhaps because he'd always wanted to see Jenny Savage naked, because he found the gap between her front teeth, that sliver of oblivion that peeked out at him when she smiled, attractive and ungainly at the same time, which bothered him and made him want to discover which it was. Perhaps because Jenny had let him know that she wanted him too. She'd been standing out on her front lawn one evening in late summer, barefoot, her pale blue pants rolled up in cuffs that pressed taut against her tanned calves, when he'd come by asking for Bernard, who was in New York on business. "But you already know that, don't you?" she said. "You two work together every day." And then she lifted one foot from the grass, curled it around the back of her calf, and smiled. She was well into her 40s, but wore her hair down to the middle of her back, as if she were half her age. She was thin, tall, her tits small but prominent in her tank top. She wore just a little too much makeup over the crow's feet at her eyes and her smile lines. She was aging, obviously hated it, and wanted to be desired. Kent Boyd was aging, hated it, and wanted to desire. From the beginning, he'd known he could do this without falling in love. Quite apart from where and with whom he slept, Kent Boyd loved his wife. Let there be no mistake about that. He liked Jenny's honesty, the way she said to him once after sex, "You have a funny nose." And when he told her that he'd broken it, she laughed. "Your son has the same one. Did he break his too?" Once in the bathroom off the Savage's master bedroom, she looked up at him, laughed, and said, "Bernard and I have never done it anywhere near a toilet before." She surprised him one night by crying in his arms, asking him just to hold her. No sex, no touching, just holding, after which he fully expected a declaration of love. Instead, she cursed Bernard. God damn him for being so dull. God damn him for working all the time, after which she laughed through her tears, so loud and so long that Kent started to laugh too, and had to ask, "What's so funny?" "Oh, nothing," she said. And when he insisted on knowing, she said, all at once angry again, "I don't get it. I really don't. Maybe I thought I'd find out, but I haven't. I can't understand why Bernard worships you so damn much. You're certainly no God, are you?" Why that hurt, he didn't know. What had he expected? He'd done well, he'd made money, he had a wife and kids, and a big house, and a bad childhood that was so remote now as to be non-existent. But no, and he told Jenny Savage this now like a confession, "I'm no God." He'd seen it coming, or so he told himself later, long after the scene had unfolded before him. Bernard, on the front stoop of Kent Boyd's house one night, a Gulf iron in his fist, pounding on the door. "Why the hell did you have to fuck my wife, Boyd?" A bad line out of a B movie. The kind of movie, nonetheless, where things happen, where men beat each other to death with clubs out on their mowed front lawns in the quiet of twilight in the suburbs, while the neighbors watched the murder happen. Jenny had gotten drunk and told him everything, and now her husband was about to club her lover to death. But instead, the other obvious thing happened. Bernard dropped the club and said, "I called Kate. I told her what kind of bastard she has for a husband." So I'll stop there. It's the middle of the story, but you get a sense of who Kent Boyd is. And obviously, they have somewhat of a problem to solve at this point. But they keep going. I'll tell you that about them. I think we have, we don't have much time, so I want to open this up to questions. Really anything about the writing life? Yes?
Could you talk a little bit about your revision process, mostly with novels?
Whoa, novels are tough. Well, I think that, it's very tough. I think that the problem with revision is you have to be able to write what writers call eat your children. That is, the things that you love most that just might not be working, might not really belong in any given piece. You got to be able to get rid of them and imagine new possibilities. And of course, we love our children, but that kind of love gets in the way of real revision. I mean, my own experience of novels is that I have to write many, many drafts to get very close, and I have to spend a lot of time in a kind of what I call the forest, where you're just writing and trying to figure out where the trails are, where the tension is, where the characters are going to lead you. So revision, I mean, for me, the story is an easier form for revision, right? Because you can oftentimes throw a whole story out. And for me, if the story is going to happen, it won't let go of me. So even if I throw, like the title story, The Flounder, I must have tried to write that for, 2 or 3 decades, right? And by which I mean, I wasn't actually close to it. I would write a story based on some of the things that were bothering me and were at the center of the current story, but it just wouldn't work. I mean, I'd basically throw it out, but it kept bothering me. I'd write another version and another until I finally did get it. I think that's the other insight I have, at least from my experience of revision, is that time, 2 things, feedback and time. It's very hard, I think, for most of us, most writers, to really have insight about our work because we're so close to it. And a good, smart reader, and I have 3 of them, and I show them everything I write, is one solution to that, right? You need somebody who's smart, who's a good reader of your work to be honest with you and tell you where, is this working? Is it sort of working? Is it not working at all? And the other is time. Put it away. And if you take it out and there's energy there, there's interest, usually you're a slightly different person and you can actually have some insight. After 3, 6 months, sometimes longer than that, about what's on the page. So those are really important. It's hard to write without the support of other writers. So that is really, really important. questions? I also have a few things to tell you all about UMass Boston, where I direct the Master of Fine Arts program in creative writing, so we could talk a little bit about that. Yeah.
I would like to hear a bit more about your time at UMass Boston, if you're willing to share it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been there since 2003, and I was hired actually to start a graduate program in creative writing, a Master of Fine Arts program, which we started in 2007. And right now I'm the director of that program, but we've got, that's my timer just to tell me when I needed to stop. That program has 4 core faculty, and we have a 5th faculty person who changes every 2 years, so we can bring in some new blood. But we have the fiction writer Oscar Melnichuk, we have poet Jill McDonough, we have a brand new poet we're very excited about, Sean Young Fung. And it's a 3-year program, and some of you who might be interested in going further in creative writing might be interested in this for in-state or Massachusetts residents. Basically, it's free. All of our students get financial support, and the support we give in-state people means that it basically pays for all the credits, all the tuition. And you have a little extra money left over. And basically it's 2 years of workshops, and you take, next to a workshop, a literature course, or a creative writing elective, which is a kind of creative writing course that's not a workshop, but that has something to do with creative writing. Like we have a book review course, we have a course on small press literary publishing. A lot of great magazines have come out of that course, by the way. We have a course in how writers read, and we have a course in meter and poetry, poetics, things like that. And then the last year, your 3rd year, you spend working one-on-one with different faculty members writing your thesis, which is sort of a version of a book that you might eventually publish. But we have other great programs too. We have a very, very large and vital undergraduate creative writing program. So if you come to UMass Boston, you can, if you're a major, an English major, you can concentrate in creative writing, and you take a series of creative writing courses and literature courses that kind of are packaged for people who are focusing on poetry, poetry writing, fiction writing, creative nonfiction writing, and then you graduate with that concentration. But let's say you're a biology major, or you're in criminology, you can also minor in creative writing, and you take the same sequence of courses and workshops, and then you kind of get the best of both worlds. We have a lot of science people who minor in creative writing in our workshops, and you're basically working with the same faculty, right, who are teaching in the Master of Fine Arts program. And then finally, we also have a master's program, which is a 2-year program, a little shorter, a little less of commitment than the MFA program, and you can concentrate in creative writing as well. And for those of you who are interested in different kinds of writing, we recently have built up a program in professional and new media writing, which is kind of the new realm of journalism. It's writing for the internet, it's writing across media, radio, and journalism as well. Kind of creative storytelling using multimedia things, photographs, illustrations, pictures, voice, etc. So we have a program in that too. You can concentrate in that, you can minor in that, just as you could in creative writing. I brought a bunch of literature for you, so I'll put those out on the piano so that you can take some of those before you go. So yeah, it's a really wonderful place to be a writer, and a lot of both of our graduate students and our undergraduate students have been incredibly successful, have published really well. One of our students, her name is Jen Began, just published her third novel, which was bought by HBO. They are going to make they've already made a series of it. I can't remember what it's called. But it involves miniature donkeys and a sex therapist. And so keep your eyes, that's coming in HBO. And she told me she made her living, as most writers have to figure out, you have to support your writing by doing something else. And what she was doing was bartending. And she will never have to bartender again after HBO bought this novel and made it into a series. So, and we have a lot of other students who are publishing novels and poetry and out there in the world and really doing wonderful work. So, any other things before we? Yeah, John.
It's a bit of a step back to the reading, but I was just wondering if you could say something about how you went about crafting this piece as it pertains to the listing part that you talked a little bit about class, like how, in addition to those listed and repeated items, like how did you sculpt the story in relation to that form?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, as you heard, it's more than just the list, right? But the list is this grounding thing. It's almost like a chorus. Like if you think about a song, right? There's that part of the song that's going to repeat, and it anchors everything else. And I think that what happened is I realized that, of course, what I was telling was the life story of this guy, Kent Boyd. That was the story. But the form, the medium through which that was being expressed, right, was this repetitive kind of choral thing that I think has a rhythm, like you can hear the rhythm of it. And so between the lists, like this is what he had, the kids, the cars, the golf, etc., the bad childhood. And it goes on. He becomes an alcoholic, and then he recovering alcoholic, and then he gets into trees, and it goes and it goes, and his wife gets sick. It goes right up to the end of his life. So between that kind of choral movement, there had to be kind of story, tension, event. He has an affair. He and his wife work to overcome that. He and his wife go to therapy, etc. There had to be the sinew and kind of living, breathing, vital part that is story, that is conflict, that is character, and sort of that. I think some of the things that allowed that to happen were what I call a character counterpoint, where you have two characters who are going to kind of bring out energy and light in each other. And of course, Kent is this loud guy, right? I could certainly picture him. He doesn't know how to speak in a low voice. He's big. He's got bravado. He expects to get what he wants, and his wife is quiet, doesn't say much, is not expressive, and it's going to kind of bring out the vulnerable side of this guy, Kent Boyd. And it was really, I think, as I wrote my way into it, the story of their marriage. So that became grounding too. So yeah, the list kind of allowed me to, it kind of gave me a safety blanket or structure to hold on to as I figured out kind of the human part of the story. Yeah. I think that's what form is really great for. Like, and poets know that. Like, when you're writing a sonnet, you've got these requirements, these things that you have to do, and then the really interesting hard part is how does that form become expressive? Because we're writing about human beings, right? We're writing about what it means to be human. Yeah. Final things before
I think we will turn to individual conversations after, but let's hear it for
So
Fulton. We have a raffle. There's a box here. Has anyone not put any student not put a raffle in here? You have one there, sure. Pop it in. We have 3 books to give away, if you can grab the other one there. Do you want to be in the raffle or not? We're gonna do it now, but I'm just, yeah, so. But we do have refreshments, I don't, we have, refreshments outside, and, oh, please, send them down the line, how about that? Paul, you can throw them in here. So, maybe take a break, there's some refreshments out front, we will choose, people, and I wanted to, while we're doing that, maybe Jonathan, if you can grab and pull that up. I just wanted to mention there's a number of different events coming up, and wanted to make you aware of that. We have a Creative Writing at Middlesex website. This is his book. Coming up a week from Saturday in this very room is a Literature Through Music concert that's part of the Lowell City of Learning Festival that's happening from the 7th through the 14th. And that will involve people reading poetry and music together. I'm actually reading a poem and jazz music behind that. We have an open poetry and fiction reading coming up on October 25th in Bedford. If you're interested in reading, please let me know, or just come by and add yourself to the list. That's at 12:30. Thank you so much. The next Visiting Writer Series is actually for alumni from Middlesex, and that will be on the Bedford campus as well, November 15th at 2 o'clock. I hope to see you there. And also that night, it's a big Middlesex day and night for us. The Middlesex night at the Untitled Open Mic in Lowell here at the Coffee and Cotton Cafe. And the featured readers is open mic, so people can sign up and read, and people sometimes play music and read stories, other things. But our featured readers for that reading that night are 2 of our professors, Professor Jonathan Bennett and Professor Willie Ramirez, are 2 featured readers that night. And then lastly, the open poetry and fiction reading on this campus is going to be December 4th. So please look for those things going out. And our website is Creative Writing at Middlesex, and the URL is creativewritingmcc.wordpress.com. So let's pick away here.
Okay,
And
just
here's some
quickly, I
winners.
have sent around basically literature about the creative writing program.
Great.
So, at UMass Boston, so if
Great.
you're interested in that.
There also are books for sale outside. The bookstore, Lowell campus bookstore person Ray is here to sell books for people who don't win and want to have them signed. I think John will sign at no extra cost.
Yes, in fact,
So, how about
more
that?
than happy.
How about picking some of those?
Okay, let's see, I'm gonna pick 3, right?
Yep. Shuffle them around here.
The first
Start with
one
that one.
is Janessa Isaac.
Janessa, she's behind the camera.
Oh,
All right. How about delivering that? Can you deliver that to her?
And the next one is Romy Mello.
Awesome. Great. Come on up.
I guess I'll do a paper here.
Oh, they know who they are too.
Yeah, Madison Giottino. Madison.
Well, again, stick around. Your individual questions, John, I'm sure will be happy to chat. Those who have books signed, you can sign your books also, and books for sale outside. Thank you so much for coming, and hope you enjoy and enjoy yourself. Lots of snacks, cookies, and chips and other stuff outside. So help yourself.
And there's more literature on UMass Boston, the English major, the MFA program, and the professional new media writing program. So, right here, help yourself.
I meant to mention, by the way, one last thing is the Dead River Review, if you're not aware of it, is our literary magazine and lots of great student work. If you're interested, please submit also. Thanks again. One more big round of applause for John Fulton.